Welcome, everyone, to this conversation with Bret Easton Ellis. The conversation is part of a series in which we explore the fate of literature in the age of culture wars and heated debates over cancel culture and freedom of speech. But mostly, we'll just talk about literature, movies, and music, and what it is like to be a human being. Bret Easton Ellis is known to our audience, so I'll keep the introduction very brief. He became known as the voice of a new generation at 21 when he published his debut novel, Less Than Zero, which is inhabited by LA youths who seemed detached from just about everything and wander decadently around in a world full of private pools, parties, sex, and easily available drugs. He was part of the so-called literary brat pack in the New York of the late 1980s, a world which now seems almost mythical. And he became one of the most controversial writers on the planet when he published American Psycho in 1991, which to my mind is still a postmodern masterpiece. Last year, he wrote the non-fiction book White, where he writes about his life, his books, and the state of American culture today. Bret, I'm very glad and very grateful that you agreed to do this conversation with us.
I'm not so sure I am.
We'll see.
But I'm here.
We'll
I'm
see.
here.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that I've been so, isolated because of the pandemic that I'm reaching out to anybody. I'd like to talk to anybody.
Well, let's hope it's going to be a pleasant conversation. So I want to talk about your authorship a little bit first.
Yes.
In your book, White, you describe how you, as a kid growing up in Sherman Oaks in LA, was pretty much left to your own devices. As you say, the world wasn't about kids yet, which is a funny sentence, I think, and to the point. No one really monitored what you did, what movies you watched, what you read. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think this generational experience, this freedom from parental control, formed you as a writer, your sensibilities as a writer?
Oh, I think completely, and I think it helped form the sensibility of an entire generation of writers and filmmakers, whether it's Quentin Tarantino or whether it's Chuck Palahniuk, whether it's David Fincher. I think there is a common theme among people who grew up that way, that they were allowed to take risks. They were allowed to go anywhere they wanted to go. There was no censoring or hand-wringing about how you wanted to express yourself. So and you saw that in films, you saw that in books, you heard that in music, and I think that freedom influenced all of us and allowed me to go into territories and explore things that I think if we had lived in a more worried or contained space, I might not have gone there. I mean, I might not have written Less Than Zero. I might have been too timid, too afraid I would offend somebody.
So what did you want to achieve when you were 20 years old and writing this novel? What did you want to do with Less Than Zero? What went through your mind, as it were?
I wanted to relieve myself of pain. Writing was always a way to relieve myself from pain, from confusion, of trying to understand the world and why I was reacting the way I did to it. And so always writing was a way of clarifying things for myself. So when I was writing Less Than Zero, it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to push out into the world, get published even. I didn't even think it would get published. I thought it would be a first novel. I'd actually written one previous to Less Than Zero, but this Less Than Zero was a way of exploring who I was, why I was in pain, and figuring out and navigating my environment. Why was it so confusing to me at 19, 20? What was happening? Why was I feeling this way? And then it comes together for me in a novel. And this has happened for now, I think I've been published for 35 years. Every book is the same. It's a way of understanding my life.
Okay, so you at no point were you trying to be the voice of a new generation.
Well, look, I think you can try it and do that all you want. I mean, I know tons of people who tried to be the voice of a generation. I don't think you can. I mean, I think I wrote about the milieu I was a part of, which happened to be Los Angeles, upper middle class. And I think that just hit the right note at a certain point, and the book became a kind of touchstone for people. And you find yourself anointed the voice of a generation, even if you are or you're not. And there are a lot of voices of a generation. You know, there's a new one, it seems, every year. So I never took that quite seriously. And it's something that my friends have properly made fun of over the decades.
So what kind of a reaction did you get? Was anybody offended by the novel?
There were some old school people at the university I went to, Bennington, where I was really writing the bulk of Less Than Zero. And, you know, there were a couple of students, even in 1985, who said, how can you publish this? It had already been accepted by a publisher and no one had read it yet. And people were curious. And so I remember a couple of people read it. One actually who went on to become a published author said, how can you publish this? Aren't you going to be so embarrassed? What are your parents going to say? There's all these drugs and you're talking about having sex with people. And aren't you going to be embarrassed? And I never even thought of that when I was writing the book. I never thought about other people. I never thought about the reader. And I only thought about myself and what I needed to explore. And I never thought about it went too far, it was too graphic, this was too much. It just felt right.
So, so how did you react as a very young man to this huge, I guess it was a huge success at the time?
Well, you have to understand that when Less Than Zero was published, I was still in college.
Yeah.
So I wasn't out into the world. So I didn't really, and you have to understand it was very different then because you don't have a feeling in 1985 that you're a huge success because you're having reviews clipped from newspapers sent FedEx to your college. Yeah. So you're in your room alone reading, oh, this is the Village Voice. They like the book. You're not inundated with cameras and, you know, podcasts and, you know, being photographed and putting stuff on social media. It was very isolating. So when the book was out that first year, I was still in college. And it really wasn't until the second book, and when I moved to New York after I graduated from college, that I did get a taste of, oh, writers are celebrities now. I'm having my picture taken someplace. But I have to tell you, you know, I grew up out in Los Angeles. Growing up out here, you become very media savvy. Yeah. And you don't take it very seriously at all. And my friends and I growing up out here always made fun of celebrity, always made fun of the trappings of celebrity. So I didn't really take it that seriously. And I felt I was able to kind of move through it, especially during the controversy about American Psycho, pretty easily and with a straight head.
So this, can you describe this whole mood after you went to New York? Because this really interests me. After I watched the series The Deuce, did you see that?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yes, I liked it a lot.
Yeah. So did that series capture the mood of New York of the 80s the way you experienced it?
Well, as far as I remember The Deuce, I think I got there after that show ended. I got there right because The Deuce was 3 seasons, and for anybody out there, you should find it. It's quite good. It's about New York and how New York actually was very seedy and very kind of dangerous in the 70s, and it's kind of about the gentrification of New York and how that happened, and actually seen through the lens of the porno industry and people who work in the porno industry. Very good show. So I missed that. Where I got dropped into was at the height of the yuppie era in New York, the height of Wall Street being a giant thing, and of celebrity blossoming in ways that we never really had before. Also for writers and for publishing. Publishing became this incredibly glamorous thing suddenly. Maybe it's because corporations started buying the publishing houses, and it's so much money flooded in that it did become, in ways that it hadn't before, a quite glamorous business with viable celebrities. And so that was the world that I dropped into. And you have to remember, I moved there the year of Black Monday, of the crash of Wall Street in 1987, which I write about in the book.
Yeah.
And even that didn't change the decadence that was ramping up in New York in the late 80s. So that's my point of reference was that time.
On your podcast, you always try to get your guests to come up with good anecdotes. Do you have an anecdote from this era of time that captures the mood?
Oh, I don't really encourage people with anecdotes because sometimes it can just go on and on and on. I really encourage them not to have any anecdotes. So that's the way my interview style is. But no, I think the main anecdote, because as I write in White in that essay about moving to New York in the late 80s, is that I really don't remember a lot of it. I was in kind of a haze. It was a very strange moment, and I had never lived there before, and I was this famous young writer, and I was writing another book, which was American Psycho at the time. And so I was in kind of a daze. I do remember, though, that I moved into my apartment there on the day of Andy Warhol's funeral. And I thought that was somewhat ironic. That's always stayed with me, April 1st, 1987. And I do remember the crash of Wall Street very well, where I was at lunch with a friend of mine. We were both 23 wearing suits at a restaurant, because everyone 23 was wearing suits. All the men were wearing suits at 23. And we realized that people were running out of the restaurant, and we asked our waiter what happened. And the waiter said, "I think Wall Street just collapsed." And we didn't have anything to do with Wall Street, so we just sort of enjoyed the rest of our lunch. Both of us completely hungover from a runaway weekend, which was also what everyone at 23 was doing. So, I look back at it, and I think it was, obviously for me, it was a very good period, because it was the period in which I wrote American Psycho, and that was something that was very cathartic, very cathartic thing.
But you weren't in a haze while writing the novel.
Well, the novel, I wasn't in a haze writing the novel. I was in a haze outside of the novel, because the novel was all I was thinking about. I mean, I would go to nightclubs, I would see friends, I was not antisocial, but that novel took up a lot of space in my head, and Patrick Bateman took up a lot of space in my head. And that really was, for me, I think, the reason why, as I write in White, why I don't really remember being at a movie screening or a party. Was I there? Had I met Charlie Sheen? Did I go to Madonna's party? Whatever. It was a very strange 3 years working on that book, and it was an intense 3 years too, writing about Patrick Bateman.
And this whole confusion about who has seen who has been to a restaurant with whom, and this confusing one person for another is very central to the book and the mood of the book as well.
It is, because it's a commentary on the conformity of that moment, where everyone seemed to start looking the same. Individuality seemed to get wiped out in terms of the fashions of that time. Everyone wanted to look rich. Yeah. Everyone wanted to wear the best suit. Everyone wanted to have the most stylish haircut. So you would really have an army of people who kind of looked the same. Now, I took it to the next level and made fun of that in American Psycho, where everyone can't, kind of tell who's who or what's what. But I also have to say it was kind of personal as well, because I often saw myself in lists, in gossip columns, being at parties, or a book an art opening, or the premiere of a musical on Broadway. And I know I wasn't there. And then you start getting paranoid and thinking, did I black out? Was I there? So there were like two Brets. There was this Bret that was floating around going to all these things. And then there was me, who was in my apartment, like eating pasta and writing about Patrick Bateman. So I don't know. I think that was dropped into the book as well. My complete alienation and unease, and just what a strange decade it was.
Yeah. And I also remember that from Glamorama, because at the end of the book, this Victor Ward, who is the main character there, he wakes up in Milan, and he just watches from Milan that his career is doing fine in New York. Somebody is obviously has taken his place in New York and is
And no one really
Yeah,
notices.
yeah.
Not only that no one notices, they prefer the impersonator. They like the impersonator better, which is the real fear of it all. I don't know. That's so interesting. The double
Yeah, yeah.
as something that's going through my work is, and the book I'm working on now. Now that you bring it up, that's occurring as well.
Also, you're writing a novel now.
I am. I'm writing a novel now, and it's actually more of a memoir, and I'm actually serializing it on my podcast. So, in fact, this afternoon, we're going to be recording part 5 of it. So it's been going on for about a couple of months. We've had part 1, 2, 3, and 4. Today we're recording part 5. And I think it's a very interesting way to approach the novel and get the novel out there in a way.
But it's going to be published in a book.
I don't know if it's going to be published in a book.
Really?
I don't know yet.
Oh.
I have no deal. I haven't taken a deal. So I'm just serializing it for my podcast subscribers, and we'll see where that goes.
I assume you can get a deal.
You know, someone said that to me. Yeah, someone said you could probably get a deal, but I don't have a deal yet.
Okay, but
I don't have a deal yet, so I don't know. We'll see. But I kind of don't even want to think about a deal until I finish this serialized novel.
So I think that's great news, because I've really been waiting for your next novel for years now. But
it's been about 11 years.
Yeah. So okay, so why we're on the subject, I wanted to ask you, why in the world do you quit writing novels and start to write for television, for shows that are never really materialized,
yes,
and go through all this stress that must be? Why?
Terrible.
Yeah,
terrible.
Why do you do it?
Well, I don't anymore. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I had always been interested in film. I grew up out here in Los Angeles. All of my friends had parents in Hollywood. We all thought we were going to be movie makers. It was the 70s. It was the movie mad decade. Great films were coming out of studios. Masterpieces were being made. Awesome directors were given money to make these projects. So we all wanted to make movies, and I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. And ultimately, I was also writing fiction. I was also working on a Less Than Zero project. And that just happened. Less Than Zero got published. And I had 5 more books I wanted to write. So I kind of thought I'd write the books, then I'll get into making films. It just took me a very long time to finish those books.
Which, by the way, I can see that.
So by the time I was done with the books, it was 2005.
Yeah.
And 25 years had eclipsed. And then I thought, I want to make these movies. I want to write and produce these movies, and I want to get into long form TV, because that seemed to be the new novel.
Yeah. But it's
a terrible business.
But it also happened immediately, though, because Less Than Zero was made into a movie, which didn't really capture the mood of the book, to say it diplomatically.
No.
So
that is true.
So, but back to American Psycho. I wanted to ask you a little bit, because you describe this lunch that you're having, because you have Patrick Bateman, but you don't really have the serial killer Patrick Bateman yet. So you're at this lunch with some yuppies, and then you suddenly decide he's going to be a serial killer. You want to talk about that?
Well, you just said it. I mean, that's exactly how it happened. I'd been working on American Psycho for about a year. And it was a much more earnest, straightforward, realistic book. And it was about this young guy lost on Wall Street. He had a girlfriend. He had a cocaine problem. I thought it was going to be like part 3 of this trilogy I'd written with Less Than Zero, then The Rules of Attraction being the college novel that connected youth to then being a grown-up, an adult in New York, in Manhattan related. Well, what happened was I started doing research, and I had friends who had older brothers who worked on Wall Street, and I had entree into it, and they were dying to talk to me. They were dying to show me their lives and what it's like to be a young hotshot on Wall Street. And I was very excited too, until I realized that, well, they weren't showing me their offices. They weren't showing me what business they did. They wanted to meet after work. They wanted to go to the trendiest restaurants. They wanted to know if I could get them into the hippest nightclubs. Because I was a best-selling author at that time. They wanted to talk about their fashion, their suits, who cuts their hair, who gets the best house in the Hamptons, who has the hottest girlfriend. And I realized after about a month of just hanging out, going to dinners, listening to them talk, apropos of nothing, one night we were at a restaurant then called Alex Goes to Camp. Those were kind of titles for the restaurants in New York in that yuppie moment. Alex Goes to Camp. And I realized, I'll never forget it, he's a serial killer. He's a serial killer.
Yeah.
My guy is a serial killer. And that is really how American Psycho, in that one little moment, came into being. And totally changed and became this kind of hallucinatory, very violent, pornographic novel about a young investor who's losing his mind.
So you have this sequence in your book White where you describe your partner reading some excerpts from the novel that you're writing, and he says to you, "You're going to get in trouble."
I thought he was alarmist. I thought he was being how do you say milk toast. I thought his sensibility was too refined. Yeah. But he was right. Yeah. He was correct. I did get into trouble. And it scared me when he read those sections of the book because I had shown them to nobody. Nobody had seen American Psycho. He was the first person to read like the middle section of the book. I was almost done with it.
Lunch with Bethany, I think.
It's a Lunch with Bethany. It's a very hardcore scene where Patrick Bateman rapes and murders a woman. And it is horrific. And it's supposed to be horrific. And I wanted to paint it that way. I didn't want to make it subdued or muted. I wanted it in your face. And I wanted it to be a powerful scene. But he said, this is really going to get you into trouble. And I just never thought that way as an artist. I never thought how to get into trouble, why I would get into trouble. It's a novel. It's not reality. Yeah. It's a representation. It's a metaphor. But ultimately, he was right. And we were in a moment in the culture where works of art, whether it was music, whether it was photography, whether it was Less Than Zero, were being overly investigated because of their content. Yeah. And if it went too far out in this politically correct moment of the early 90s, which we luckily got over, there were things like, Madonna's had videos and Two Live Crew, Robert Mapplethorpe, American Psycho being an example of that. They were all caught up in this haze of being too far out, and there was a censorious attitude in the air.
So you basically got canceled from your publisher right before the publication of the book.
30 years before anybody else got canceled.
Yeah, well, congratulations. So what can you describe? So can you describe what happened? What did they say to you?
Well, what happened was the book was turned in. I had a contract, and there were grumblings in the house as the book made its way through the standard, the standard way a book makes it through the house. It's copy edited. Your editor has already edited it. It's sent to the art department. People are reading it to figure out how to do press for it. And there were a lot of people who were angry with the book. They thought it went too far. They thought it was too violent. They thought it was pornographic, in very bad taste. They thought it was in very, very bad taste. And I think it could have survived the publication at that house. It was Simon & Schuster. But Simon & Schuster, like many of the publishing houses then, had been bought by a corporation.
I see.
A corporation now owned the house. The corporation didn't like the bad publicity this yet-to-be-published book was getting. And they thought it was harming their business somehow. So it came down from the head of the corporation to cancel the book, to get it out of the corporation. The publishing house is just one segment of the corporation. So my publisher took he was the fall guy. I knew him, and I know he did not cancel it, but it was canceled by the corporation, and that was a very scary moment for the arts. It was the beginning of something that is really happening now, that is flowering out of control. Corporations dictate content. And let's be very clear. I got published by a better house.
Which
better
was
house.
Knopf?
It was Knopf, Random House Knopf. Yeah. And I've been with Knopf ever since now for 30 years. And so, so I can't cry bitter tears over this at all. And in fact, I was quite amused by the entire scandal when it happened. It didn't really affect me that much.
But a friend of mine noticed that there had in fact been done an alteration in the first British edition of the novel. Do you remember that?
Yes. I remember a major alteration, which was, I didn't know how bad, it might not be the same. The libel laws, I found out, in the UK are really bad. And there's a scene, I think this is what you're referring to, there's a scene where Patrick Bateman goes to a U2 concert.
Yeah.
He goes to a U2 concert and he starts fantasizing that Bono is the devil. Yeah. And he starts imagining a friendship with Bono and them as the devil, and they can like collaborate or whatever. And like British publisher says, that's got to go. So that entire paragraph of Patrick Bateman fantasizing that Bono is the devil was gone. I really don't think Bono would have cared. I think he would have liked it. And in fact, didn't he pretend to be Mephistopheles or whatever in incarnations in his concerts later on? So.
But that disappeared from all subsequent editions of the novel, right?
Not in the U.S., no.
Okay.
My U.S. publishers kept it.
I have the British, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
That's the British, yeah.
Yeah. So you rewrote the scene for that?
British I cut the scene.
Just actually, cut it out.
My British publisher cut the scene.
Okay.
And there are things in white that were cut as well. So it always is for Brits a bit of a problem, a bit of a battle. I don't like those 2 days where we go through the book, but they need to do it.
So how did you react when the criticism came? I read through some of it, and some of it was pretty harsh on you.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It said a dirty book by a dirty writer in the Washington Post.
I take that proudly. I love that. I'm a dirty writer and then I wrote a dirty book. That's just me. I think that's great.
So, and another thing I've always wanted to know is, because one of the most hilarious aspects of the novel is that Patrick Bateman writes small essays about music.
Yes.
And he always says that earlier I didn't understand his stuff because it was too artsy or too new wave or too I guess post-punk or something. So how far from Patrick Bateman's tastes are your own taste in music, or where at the time? Do you share?
Very different.
Yeah.
No, very, very different. I realized while I was writing American Psycho that 3 of the most popular bands in America, or musical acts, were Genesis, Whitney Houston, and Huey Lewis and the News.
Yeah.
Okay, and I realized that Patrick Bateman fancied himself a bit of a music critic, and he thought he loved music, though he doesn't really listen to it. It's all like decorative to him. Yeah. Going to see a band is cool, or this band is cool. So I started to write these music reviews in Patrick Bateman's voice, and they kind of got out of hand. They're rather long, and they come during the last section of the book. And you know, when people ask me, like, what was the most disturbing thing you had to write in terms of the murders, I said the murders weren't disturbing. Listening to Genesis for a month and taking notes was far more disturbing than anything else in the book, or going through Whitney Houston's catalog. I mean, I didn't mind Huey Lewis too much. There was stuff in his repertoire that I liked, but you know, Genesis was tough.
And the most hilarious thing is when he praises Whitney Houston's anthem, "Learning to Love Yourself."
Yes, that's true, and that actually made it into the movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did you like the movie?
You know, I have a complicated relationship with the film of American Psycho because I never saw the book as a movie. I write scripts, as we talked about, a somewhat disastrous occupation. But I write scripts, and I write novels, and the novels aren't scripts, and the novels aren't movies. And if you read American Psycho, you wonder, how in the hell could this ever be a movie? Yeah. It's just this sort of unreliable narrator. It's 400 pages. There's no plot. It's super violent and pornographic. How can you make this into a movie? Well, they did.
Yeah.
And a lot of people wanted to. I mean, from David Cronenberg to Oliver Stone to, you know, wanted to make this movie. From people like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio was cast at one point. Yeah. So it got turned into this film ultimately, I think, luckily, with Christian Bale, who I think is fantastic in the movie. Yeah. And I think the movie actually gave the book a second life. So I can only be pleased about the movie. I just don't know if American Psycho needs to be a movie or works as a movie because of its unreliability.
Exactly.
And the mystery of American Psycho is it happening or is it not happening? Is it in his head or is it reality? You kind of have to answer that when you do a movie. And that's sort of my problem with it. Otherwise, I love the cast. It looks really good. And Mary Herron proved that she was very talented with that material.
So in a way, it's just too literal.
It's too literal, and it's also, but at the same time, I have to say, it's great to have it because we have Christian Bale,
yeah,
who is really marvelous in it, and marvelous to look at. Yeah. And so, I mean, anybody who has any problem watching Christian Bale run around naked, I don't know. I'm not one of them, so I'm perfectly happy to watch that movie every now and then. But it's strange because I did a script, and other people have done scripts. And basically, there are only about 30 scenes that are filmable. Yeah. And every screenwriter who took a shot at it used those 3 scenes, and yet Mary Herron and Guinevere Turner, the co-writer, got credit. It's all from the book. Everyone said, oh my God, this is an amazing thing. She changed the book. No, everything is from the book. Every line of dialogue is from the book. Yeah. And so when I see essays where people say, Mary Herron made the movie so much better, her dialogue and her screenplay. Well, it's all from the book, guys. So, give me a little credit.
But I think she kind of got the book, though, because
she completely got the book. And I knew her for many, many years because she was first brought on to do it in the mid-90s, the mid-1990s. The movie was eventually released in 2000. So during those years, I got to know her, and we hung out a lot. We talked a lot about the book. I wasn't sure she was the right director. But then I was positive that Oliver Stone was not the right director when he came on board, and she was kind of pushed to the side. And Leonardo DiCaprio came on to make the movie with Oliver Stone. So I went through all of this drama with her, and she really did understand the book. I think in ways more than David Cronenberg understood.
Yeah,
she really got the satire.
Yeah, the black satire, and the book is hilarious. At times, even the lunch with Bethany is hilarious. I mean, the lunch itself, it always cracks me up.
Yeah,
and the movie is hilarious, I think. So I think that's
everything should be funny. Everything should be funny. So all good art is fun.
I asked this young writer today, because I teach at the Writers Academy here, who had read the American Psycho, whether she was offended by it. And she said no. And I asked her whether she watched a lot of horror movies as a kid, and she said yes. And I really sort of, you write a lot about this, that you sort of come from horror movies, and that maybe makes it sort of easier for you to do that violence in American Psycho.
That could be true. I also read a lot of fiction, a lot of comic books, but I think part of, and look, there's plenty of horror movies and horror fiction and graphic novels and comic books that are out now. But I think what was going on then is that we were completely left, I want to say unaided. There was no parental control over us. And so we had access to these movies. And you have to understand, it was very different in the 70s. The horror films weren't ironic. They weren't meta. They weren't jokey. They weren't campy like so many of today's horror movies are. They were ambiguous. I mean, why did Reagan get possessed in The Exorcist? Why did Carrie have her powers? Why did the shark show up in Jaws? Why was the serial killer in the sorority in Black Christmas? I mean, there was a kind of a mystery about that these horror movies that seemed to be a reflection of life. Like, what is life? Is there any concrete answers to what experience is as we're getting older? And you begin to realize there really isn't. And so I began to see life as a reflection of the horror movies that I was watching. And they really helped me grow up. They really made me understand the world fast, the randomness of it, the cruelty of it. And I also was experiencing this because of my parents' very complicated marriage. My father was an alcoholic. There was a lot of anger and violence in the house I grew up in. So it was all connected. somehow. And horror movies were that medium that kind of forced me to grow up.
And you write a lot about parenting and being a son and trying to be a father in Luna Park.
Yes.
Which is kind of I don't know if you see it as a sort of a reckoning with the whole parental generation.
Completely. I do. And I see it as two things. I see it as a reckoning of the parenting of my generation, and I think the mistakes inherent in it. I do think that my generation reacted a little too negatively to their boomer parents, who they felt never gave them enough love, and like I've said, left us completely alone to our own devices. There was no parental authority. And I think what was so strange is that they grew up resenting it, and then I think they smothered their kids. And that's why I think you have the neuroses of millennials to the degree that you do. But with Lunar Park, I wanted to write satirically about my generation's parenting, but I also wanted to put myself in my father's shoes. I wanted to forgive my father for all the shit that I had endured with him. I wasn't speaking to him by the time he died. It had been about a year after American Psycho was published. And I was at a moment in my life where I felt I had to resolve this. I had to resolve this, like, resentment about Dad and all the bad things Dad. I wanted to get over that. I really wanted to end it. And so writing Lunar Park was that catharsis. And I did. As I was writing the final pages of Lunar Park, I remember I was crying, and this weight just lifted off of me, and I have only felt love toward my father from now on. I've always felt I understand him so much more now, even now at 56, than I did at 40.
Yeah, but it is. I felt that as I just read through a review I wrote about that when it came out, and I can see from my own reaction that I felt the same. Reading the last pages, this is a reconciliation between generations that's just very
completely. That's
moving.
what it was.
Yeah. But it is though also an indictment of the parents of your own generation, who drug their kids and tried to get them into Ivy League universities and so forth.
Yeah, Now, it was just done on a much grander scale. Certainly my parents had their own neuroses about their children. They wanted us to look a certain way. They had ambitions for us as well to a degree, but they weren't so insistent upon it. We weren't these, I don't know, these, I forgot how it's put in the book, but they wanted something, I forgot what the term is. They wanted a return on their investment.
Yeah.
That's what I said. The parents of today want a return on their investment. And that seemed like, oh, that's exactly it. And I think there is a lot of, so much of millennial anxiety stems from this kind of smothering, helicoptering, exhibitionistic culture that they were raised in. And it is. That kind of environment is directly related to how my generation was raised. And some of us felt, God, we were gypped, we were cheated, we didn't have our parents there all the time, and then they overcompensated. And I think that's caused a lot of millennial anxiety.
Yeah. Luna Park is also a take on celebrity culture, where you self-ironically depict yourself as a kind of a lost celebrity in a way. Ending up in front of the television with a lot of cocaine and, just sort of bumming out. And then you try to, well, not you, but the character who's called Bret Easton Ellis.
Me. I did that. Okay. Character, but I did that too. Okay.
So that's a picture of celebrity culture in 2005 or 4-5.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to move on to that piece you did from the Daily Beast in 2011, because that's a kind of a diagnosis that you write there about, apropos Charlie Sheen and his sort of meltdown, public meltdown, and you write about empire, post-empire. Those are the two concepts that you use in order to understand what is happening to American culture. So can you explain those two
Correct.
terms?
Well, it's very simple. It's actually very
Yeah.
simple. There was something about that moment in 2010 when Charlie Sheen was having this very public breakdown that was not being done behind the hospital doors or in a shrink's office or being guarded by publicists. He was having it in the media, right out front, in front of everybody. And it was, to me, the epitome of what had been going on in the culture, which was a kind of freedom of expression. You saw it in Lady Gaga. You saw it in interviews like John Mayer gave this famous interview in Playboy, where he just talked completely honestly about his sex life and how he felt about race. And he'd be completely canceled today if he gave that interview. But you saw it in pop songs. You saw it in pop music. There seemed to be this flowering of a kind of freedom of expression that, of course, social media and the internet encouraged. And Charlie Sheen seemed to embody that. He just didn't give a shit. He didn't care. And it was very different behavior from a celebrity than empire celebrity, and empire culture, which began after World War II in America, where suddenly pop culture exploded. And the mediums of film and pop music and TV exploded. And so, but you also had a kind of propriety. You also had a kind of celebrity that had to act in a certain way that was a reflection of the propriety of the times. No one could ever go too far out. Everything was kind of secretive and shaded, and you kept your mouth shut to a degree. Of course, there were loudmouths all the time. Of course, you had a John Lennon. Of course, you had a Muhammad Ali. There were outliers who did seem to be honest people, but it was all encased in a kind of bubble, in a kind of polite dome. And I saw that cracking in 2009, 2010, 2011, and I really thought there was going to be this flowering of expression in the post-empire moment. Now, that post-empire moment was very briefly lived because corporate culture entered into the picture and stifled it because it was too controversial. It was too distracting. You can't say that. You can't be on this side. You're hurting the brand. You're hurting the brand. And so it really did. This is in many ways why we are where we are now, with cancel culture, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, people terrified to give an interview, people terrified to post anything on social media because they'll be destroyed, they'll be canceled, they'll lose their jobs or whatever. And that is kind of what white is about. White is about that idea that you grew up in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s even, where freedom of expression and saying what you wanted was completely fine. What do you do when you end up in 2015, 2016, 2018, realizing you can't say this, you can't say that, that's cultural appropriation, that's going to get you fired from a job? And we're just talking about, I'm not talking about even actions, I'm just talking about things you say and how you express yourself. So that, in a nutshell, is really the difference between empire, what I mean post-empire, and where we have ended up today.
And I noticed that you don't really blame this whole woke movement. Well, you blame that as well, but you blame basically the corporate culture. That the moment that the corporate culture sort of appropriates or hijacks the political struggle, then it becomes an oppressive regime.
Yes, I couldn't say it better myself. I also think part of it really does have to do with this kind of dream-like psychosis that everyone in America is somehow a victim. Everyone is somehow aggrieved. And that this means we have to act out our neuroses because of some presupposed pain or victimhood that we share. And that, unfortunately, is really taught a lot in college campuses, and I think it starts in academia and then just has bloomed out of control in the last 8 years. And I think it's going to be, I know there's a push back on it because it's just not getting anything anywhere. But yes, I do think that corporate culture, ironically, is the one that is endorsing woke culture.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
And in a totalitarian way.
Well, if you lose your job because you tweet something, If three people want to stop a museum exhibit because in one of the many paintings someone was wearing a Ku Klux Klan robe and the artist is using it ironically, see, this is the problem. I think what's happened with woke culture and with all of these authoritarian movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Me Too or what have you, is that there is no room for metaphor. There is no room for seeing something as something else. Automatically, a Klan costume is a depiction, it is racist, not just a depiction of racism. And so we're in this weird moment where everyone is extremely literal minded. No one can see something, the layers of stuff. And so that's, as a writer, I'm completely worried about that. I mean, I've had it happen to me before, but it went away. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anybody who's an artist in America cannot be somewhat worried at where we are in terms of this kind of re-education camp culture where you have to, and it really does come from the East Coast, the West Coast, the liberal elite, I dare say, who really propagate all of this. It's not the people in the middle. I mean, there's a big thing right now in our country where you have to refer to Latinos as Latinx. Latinx is the term. Universities. Look, I know a lot of guys here, and I've asked them, "Do you prefer to be called Latinx?" And they go, "We don't even know what that is, man. What are you talking about?" Well, we don't know. We don't call each other this. But yet in the media it's always used. So it is a certain part of the landscape that is trying to re-educate other people, and it is a corporate culture that is trying to make everyone more woke, if I'm just like whatever blabbering on.
Yeah, so in the beginning of White, you are sort of talking about this, but you're describing yourself in a way that reminds me of the novels.
Yes.
So you're writing White as a continuation of your novelistic work, right?
Yes,
yeah.
True.
Yeah.
It was a literary experience.
Yeah. And so you're describing an annoyance, a vague yet almost overwhelming and irrational annoyance which tears through me, maybe up to a dozen times a day. And it's over things so seemingly minor, so out of my usual field of reference, that I was surprised by how I had to take a deep breath to dismantle the disgust and frustration that was all due to the foolishness of other people. And this is and this is your online experience,
yes.
Right? This is about being online. So
correct.
Why is it? Why I know this annoys myself, and I haven't really gotten my head around it. Why is it so annoying? I'm almost never annoyed when I talk to people, but if you're online, you get very annoyed.
I think it is the certainty.
Yeah.
The certainty that people express themselves with that is annoying. That everyone thinks, or maybe they don't even think, but they want to push it out there that they are right and that you are wrong. I realize that social media is a fight. It's a fight. And it's one that I no longer wanted to play at a certain point. And I kind of disengaged from it. I use social media as a way to promote my podcast and maybe recommend a movie or a book. But overall, I really haven't stopped engaging with it because everybody knows Twitter is poisonous. Everyone knows that it's a cage fight. It doesn't matter what you tweet. You are going to be attacked somehow, no matter how nebulous and harmless the tweet is. It's a machine built for hate. So I go on in the morning. I did it this morning because I check the time. I get my phone, check the time, and then I look at my emails, and then I do go straight to Twitter to see what the news is. Yeah. So I use Twitter as a news source, but nothing else, and I try not to engage with it. Facebook, I don't even think I go on Facebook much anymore.
So, but you have been attacked for your tweets,
yes.
And can you tell me about what happened at that? I guess it's called GLAD event.
Yes.
What does it
The
stand
gay and
for?
lesbian, it's the gay and lesbian defamation, anti-defamation.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So you were invited and then you got disinvited. And what had you
I
said?
Look, as a gay man, I am very outspoken about how gay people have been portrayed in television and in film, sometimes with very transgressive language. And sometimes my critiques are quite harsh. And I had tweeted some things about the TV show Glee, which is a very gay-friendly show about a high school. It's a musical. It was made by Ryan Murphy. This is really ancient history, but it is like, and so I was talking about how gay the show was in ways that I felt were negative as a gay man. I thought it was harmless, but people were offended. Offended that I said that. They were offended that I said an openly gay actor was never going to be cast in the 50 Shades of Grey movies. They were offended that I said that. I knew there was no way a corporation like Universal was going to cast an openly gay actor to play that role. And when I just said this out loud, tweeted it, I was attacked for being a gay-hating fag. So these tweets bubbled up in the week I was invited to go to GLAAD, to their annual party, their annual award show. And that some people found these tweets, and I was asked not to come, and then to meet with GLAAD and have a kind of therapy session with them. And I said no, thank you, and that was it. But it was a very complicated moment because I feel that gay people should be able to criticize gay culture, and they should be able to point out stuff. But in corporate gay culture, that is not allowable. Cannot do that, and I found that out, and I write about that in White.
So I wanted to ask you about all this. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that is being promoted in woke, the woke movement is, I guess most people would think legitimate. We shouldn't be racist. We should be pro,
of course,
gay liberation and so forth. And
yes, completely, 100%.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, have any of the attacks that you have experienced made you change your mind about opinions that you held, and so that you changed, position?
No, not at all. It hasn't. The biggest one lately had been when I talked on my podcast how I didn't think Black Panther should have been nominated for the Oscar for Best Picture. And I said this in 20 seconds on my podcast. 20 seconds, I was having a conversation with someone. I said, it's ridiculous that Black Panther is nominated. Disney probably bought the vote or whatever. It's just a standard Marvel movie, but because it's Black, it's got to be nominated, and we've got to pretend it's so much better than it is. Okay, that's the moment the culture we're in. 20 seconds, I was massacred for that. I was trending on Black Twitter for 4 days. That is not fun. Being attacked. We're gonna get you, motherfucker. We know where you live. How dare you diss Black Panther? Black Panther's the best. You're a racist son of a bitch. I mean, racist, because I just didn't like Black Panther that much. But I don't change my opinion about that. I actually watched the movie again to make sure that I felt correct about it. I don't think anything that I said about 50 Shades of Grey, or certain gay TV shows, or Catherine Bigelow, for example, when I didn't like Zero Dark 30 or The Hurt Locker, and I said she was overrated because I believed in this town she was a woman and she needed to be represented of something. And I think if she had been a man, I don't think she would have been on the cover of Time and all this stuff. It's all very obvious, but it really wasn't against Catherine Bigelow. It was against the hypocritical notion of Hollywood. And I got tripped up. I got a lot of blame and a lot of criticism for some of those tweets and for some of those opinions, but I wouldn't take any of them back. But I might have worded them differently.
But you do experience the attacks as very unpleasant and difficult to handle. or you manage to don't care about it.
Yes, they're frustrating.
Yeah.
They're frustrating, and that's why they stopped. That's why I don't engage on that level anymore. I realized, first of all, that most of this was on Twitter, and that Twitter, which I thought was a wonderful thing in the beginning, and I write about this in a essay in White about my Twitter history, my rise and then my fall, and it's just not a good place for context. And I think as a writer who wrote long articles and long novels, that I could somehow conform to the notions of Twitter, that I could express myself in ways that I wanted to in 160 or 200 characters. That's a hard thing to do. Yeah. And at least I found it difficult when people started taking Twitter more seriously. The first 2 years of Twitter were a blast. Yeah. I loved tweeting outrageous things all the time. And then something switched in the culture. Yeah. And suddenly it was, you can't tweet that. You can't say that. That's a bad tweet. Bad tweet. I can't tweet this. I mean, really? This is where we are now? We are.
Yeah. You told us that you're writing a novel now. Has any of this influenced the way you think and feel, and when you're writing, that you maybe feel that I shouldn't perhaps write this, or maybe word a little bit? No?
Never.
So you're unapologetic.
It's fiction.
Yeah.
It's not reality. It's fiction. So there is a section in this book where there's many sections of this book, but there's a section of the book that is sexual and gay. And I was thinking, and because I'm reading this out loud, I'm reading this entire book out loud on my podcast, I'm going to have to read the sex scene out loud. And do I really want to? And I was writing, going, do I want to read this out loud? That I'm going to, the particulars of the sex scene? And I was out to dinner with a friend, another writer, and I was saying, I was worried about this. And my friend said, are you crazy? Who cares? Go as gay as you want to go. Just like cover everybody and come. Just do as sexual as shit as you want. And because no one cares. It's all niche. Yeah. Who cares? Do whatever you want. And I was going to do it anyway, but hearing that from him, it just really encouraged the freedom that I've always felt about writing fiction. That you cannot have any limitations. That without the freedom, then you might as well not write. You might as well go into advertising or something.
Okay, I think we are nearing the end of this conversation. I just wanted to ask you, when I read through your work, I sense this sadness everywhere. Would that be something that you could relate to and understand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think so. I mean, life is in many ways very sad, and it's something that you have to deal with on a daily level. Life is sad. It's also livable. It also has great moments. It also has a lot of fun. But there is an undercurrent of sadness that underlines everything. But that undercurrent of sadness is also what gives you the light. So without the sadness, you don't have the light. I mean, I know I'm sounding like Leonard Cohen. I mean, I'm a Leonard Cohen like, but it's but so yes, if that's there. But I also tend to not let that trip me up, and I don't want that to be the only thing one takes away.
No, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, your books are very funny, often very funny.
Well, I hope so, because without humor, then there's nothing worth listening to, watching, or reading. Humor, all the great writers, I believe, are funny.
Okay, let's end there then. And thank you so much for this very, to me, very fun conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful way to spend a morning in the season of the virus here in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're getting the applause.
All right.